Hi, everyone, and welcome to our little adventure. I'd like to introduce Erin England from BioCatch, who's going to be our Dr. Watson for today.
And I'd like to introduce Yuri Rivner, also from BioCatch, who will be Sherlock Holmes today.
And we will be fighting deep social engineering, a very mysterious new crime happening in the streets of London and elsewhere these days.
I had called upon my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, one day in the autumn of last year, and found him in deep conversation with a very stout, florid-faced, elderly gentleman with fiery red hair. With an apology for my intrusion, I was about to withdraw when Holmes pulled me abruptly into the room and closed the door behind me. "You could not possibly have come at a better time, my dear Watson," he said cordially.
So let's meet the characters of this story called The Red-Headed League. We start with Jabez Wilson. He owns a pawnbroker shop. It's essentially an establishment in London for secured loans. It's a physical shop located in the financial district. And now let's meet the assistant, Mr. Vincent Spaulding. He actually got the shop assistant position a few months ago and urged Jabez to apply for the job at the Red-Headed League. Let's focus on that specific piece. So Jabez, he's a London gentleman with fiery red hair, like very, very red hair. He applies for an ad in the newspaper offering highly paid work that only red-handed gentlemen can apply for.
To the Red-Headed League. On account of the bequest of the late Ezekiel Hopkins of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, USA, there is now another vacancy open which entitles a member of the League to a salary of £4 a week for purely nominal services. All red-headed men who are sound in body and mind and above the age of 21 years are eligible. Apply in person on Monday at 11 o'clock to Duncan Ross at the offices of the League, 7 Pope's Court, Fleet Street.
That was the actual ad on the newspaper, and Duncan Ross is the person that accepted Jabez to the League, to the Red-Headed League. He's the manager of the Red-Headed League office in London. He offers Jabez this dream job. There are two minor conditions: copying the Encyclopedia Britannica as Jabez is in their office all day long. And then Jabez must not leave the office for any reason whenever he is at that post. So essentially, Jabez, in order to apply and meet the requirements for that job, is going to be away from his shop. Then at some point, a few weeks later, Duncan Ross mysteriously disappears. And this is when Jabez contacted us. How do we actually crack this case? Let's actually talk about the real crime. Spaulding was none other than the mastermind, John Clay, one of the smartest people in London, selected the shop as ideally located to tunnel into a certain bank, a physical tunnel, and established long-term credibility with Wilson, then published the ad in the newspaper and pushed Wilson to accept the job. In fact, hundreds of people went to that street and address to be interviewed. But of course, his assistant or accomplice, his sidekick, his name is Archie, not really Duncan Ross. He basically set up the whole thing. The Red-Headed League job was to keep Wilson out of his shop while they dig, and the plan was foiled by us. We figured it all out. We set a trap at the vault using the Scotland Yard to actually apprehend the two criminals. So the crime was foiled, but how do we actually understand that it is a crime? Because all of these were very mysterious circumstances. The job itself, it was too good to be true, creating this sense of urgency, unique opportunity, telling the lucky winner he's the best of class, right? So you have hundreds of people with red hair, and like only Jabez is the one that is going to be selected. He's like best out of everyone. The job makes no sense at all, right? And then suspicious behavior around the shop. So if we look at the shop itself, the assistant is willing to get half wages to learn the business, frequents the shop seller so he can develop photos, The last thing is some high-risk events in the vicinity. There was a specific bank in the financial district, not too far from the shop, that was expecting a huge shipment of French gold. Take all of these features, put it into the brilliant mind of the best detective in London, and there you have it. So,
well, I thought over the matter all day, and by evening I was in low spirits again. For I had quite persuaded myself that the whole affair must be some great hoax or fraud, though what its object might be I could not imagine. It seemed altogether past belief that anyone could make such a will, or that they would pay such a sum for doing anything so simple as copying out the Encyclopedia Britannica.
That was actually Jabez, thinking it over. Is it too good to be true? And in many cases, the victims of social engineering, sometimes they do sense that something is off, but they still go with it because the whole story is so convincing and so much is invested in that story that they basically at some point just believe in it and go with it. So Dr. Watson, maybe this is a good time for you to tell us a little bit about social engineering.
Yes, first let's define social engineering. It's a psychological manipulation of people into performing actions or divulging confidential information. The con is the purpose of information gathering, fraud, or system access. It differs from a traditional con as it's one of many steps in a more complex scheme. A broader definition is any act that influences a person to take an action that is not in their best interest. Online social engineering comes in many different forms. First, we have credentials harvesting. So this comes in the form of phishing, vishing, or smishing, tricking victims into willingly giving up credentials or sensitive information. Remote access tool traps, which is a near real-time drama. So this comes in the form of help desk scams where the victim is coerced to install a remote access tool and hands over access to their online banking session directly to the fraudster. OTP, or a one-time use passcode collection, user distraction. This is a real-time drama. So this comes in the form of phone scams where the OTP is collected for immediate use, for example, enrolling and paying in a real-time payment method such as Zelle. Or we see malware like Trojan, man in the browser functionality designed to distract the user and collect the OTPs. Finally, we have our most nefarious social engineering yet, which is deep social engineering. We see voice scams where the genuine user is tricked into transferring money directly to the fraudster.
So let's actually start with this story of the help desk. Someone actually got a phone call from the bank after the bank's fraud team saw something suspicious in real time and called the user. That was actually the session flow. You see the user logging in and you see all of these payment activities. What I can tell you about this specific case, we talk about online banking here. The user passed the two-factor authentication code. This is in the UK, and in wealth management, that's the norm when you log in. It's coming from the user's trusted device, regular location, normal activity time. Transaction amount is pretty typical for this specific person. The session is a little bit longer than usual, and there were 6 payments made to a new beneficiary. So there are some more suspicious facts here, but of course, in itself, it's not enough to basically say something is off here. Now, the actual story is that the user, when the fraud team called that person, said, hey, I have a problem in my online banking, and you called me an hour ago and you said that there is this problem. You're the help desk and you can help me fix it if I only give you some remote support functionality. And I said, hey, I'm 80 years old. I don't understand much about computers. You said, it's going to be fine, sir. Do you know Google? And I said, yeah, sure, I know Google. And you asked me to go to Google and search for TeamViewer, which is this software that gives remote assistance. And I found it and I installed it and I configured it and I gave you guys remote support or whatever. It was very difficult for me. And then you asked me to log into my account so you can run some tests. And you said that you're going to call back, but now you guys are calling. You do not know about the first people that called me. So I'm very, very confused. I don't really know what's going on. Now, as you understand, obviously that was social engineering, tricking the user to install TeamViewer, which is just a commercially available remote access tool. This is the user logging in. So at the login itself, everything looks fine. You see the user moving the mouse. It's going to be a smooth hand-eye coordination, the regular behavior for this person. The keypad was used to entering OTP. That's what the bank always sees for this user. The behavior basically matches the baseline for this account. But 2 minutes later, now everything is different. You see this mouse motion? This is the fraudster actually using remote access. When you use remote access, there are some delays in the hand-eye coordination. The mouse is very jumpy and disrupted. That's because of the remote access. The user can be in the UK, but the attacker can be anywhere around the world. The numpad was used all of a sudden instead of the keypad for entering amount information. So the bottom line is many differences in the behavior post-login. The session was essentially hijacked. And this is a very typical case of social engineering, tricking the user to install something on their device, allowing the fraudster to use remote access. Something else that we see mainly in the US these days, it's a call coming from the fraud team. Essentially, it's part of a longer cycle of fraud. So the fraudster basically obtains a lot of PII information, phone number, names, social security numbers, etc., for the account holders of a specific bank. Then using some robotext, sending a lot of text messages, hey, we see some suspicious transaction. User replies, yeah, I didn't do this transaction. And now the fraud team is calling the user. There was also not just these suspicious transactions, but also a suspicious login done from the same area. Was it you? And the user says, no, it wasn't me. Oh, so we have to reset your account right now. We're going to send you a one-time code. Just read the code to us, and then we can reset your account, and everything will be fine. By that time, user is very convinced that it is the real fraud team of the bank, providing the OTP. What the fraudster is doing, obviously, is resetting the password. User is locked out. And it's basically game over at this point because fraudster is now fully in control over that online banking account. They can enroll the user to Zelle. They can make payments. Zelle is this P2P scheme that is very popular these days in the US. So essentially, that's the way the fraud is being done. Now, we actually got our hands on an actual recording that was done by one of the gangs attacking a credit union in the US. So I'm going to play that recording to you. The source is a US-based credit union. You're going to see a Zelle fraudster talking to a potential victim and explaining them exactly what to do. It will start by telling them what their social security number is, just to establish that it's indeed the bank having that conversation with them.
But I just don't know you. I can't give you my social security number.
No, we're not. No, Mr. Lichtenberg, we're not asking for your social security number. I can tell you your social security number, sir. I can verify it with you.
Okay, what is my number?
Okay, I do have your social security in here, Mr. Lichtenberg. It's 5344.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and secure your account. Your account was used in Pennsylvania at a super target for the amount of $1,645.99.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time. Can I call you back? Do you have a call number so I can actually just call for a quick direction?
Not to cut you off, I do want to go ahead and inform you that I do have a representative on the phone with another client claiming to be you, Mr. Lichtenberg. So we do have to make an outbound call to speak to the cardholder. Due to the fact somebody did call in and try to pose as you, sir, try to pursue those transactions. That's the reason for that outbound call today, okay?
Sounds great. So let me call you back. So I take my debit card. On the backside of that, I find the phone number, and then I call you back.
You're not listening. You're not listening, Mr. Lichtenberg. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I just told you we have to make an outbound call due to the fact somebody called in and posed as you trying to pursue those transactions. I did verify here your social security number, and I did verify your date of birth here. Are you aware of any of these transactions that took place today in Pennsylvania, Mr. Lichtenberg?
No, I'm not. I don't authorize the charges.
Now, Mr. Lichtenberg, have you authorized anybody in the state of Pennsylvania to access your online banking account in the last 24 to 48 hours, sir?
No.
Okay, well, so for your protection, we're actually going to go ahead and put a temporary hold on that online banking due to the fact somebody did access your online banking account from a Pennsylvania location. Okay. So I'm actually going to go ahead and begin on that hard reset for that online banking account. So once you do log back in, you'll be able to create a new password so we can make sure that your account is secure, okay? Okay, I'm actually going to go ahead and send you a mobile verification code to the number ending in 8101. You can go ahead and repeat it once you do receive that.
So as you have heard, this is a very, very clever social engineering, well done, and essentially, I would say, quite convincing.
So here we have an example of what we would see on the online side of the phone call that we just listened to. So this is the screenshot we're looking at is the user session journey. So they log into the banking session, they access their dashboard, which is the second step. And then this particular user goes through the Zelle enrollment process. The bank requires the user to enter an OTP code, which you could hear the fraudster was asking the victim for over the phone. So the purpose is to enter that OTP code and complete Zelle enrollment. They're not actually helping the victim. In this case, we also see a contact information change. There's some time spent on that page immediately after Zelle enrollment. So even if I'm looking at these pieces of information, we see a Zelle enrollment, the user enters OTP with no issue whatsoever, and then immediately changes their contact information after enrolling the Zelle. That on its own is not much to go on. So let's take a deeper look at the behaviors. Within this particular session, we're seeing some key behaviors that stand out that don't look like the behaviors of the genuine user based on their past sessions. So the user starts using the arrow keys. Historically, this particular user is always using the mouse scroll wheel to navigate, to scroll up and down. But in this case, we see the arrow keys being used quite a bit, where the user has almost never used arrow keys. Additionally, we see high rate of deleting, which this user doesn't typically do. So we're seeing a lot of corrections being made. So these are both anomalous for this particular user based on their past history. We see a change in how the user is scrolling from mouse wheel now to arrows. There's excessive deleting. So there's a lot of corrections being made. They've made a contact information change. They've enrolled in a new P2P real-time payment method, which we know is a high target for fraud. So this is a recipe for, we want to take a second look and perhaps validate this user outside of just the OTP code.
Yeah, the closest real fraud case that I came across when thinking about the same sort of story of the Red-Headed League is this one. This is from the UK. It's corporate banking. One of the customers of online banking, a major online bank in the UK, is normally coming from the same location, the same device. They're doing high amount international transfers because it's a business. There's a specific transaction, $2 million going to a new beneficiary. But again, this is normal for this specific business. Now, what we can see is that it's a typical sort of user behavior. We can see that the way they normally operate is normal. We see smooth hand-eye coordination here. We see that when they type information, it's normal. Whenever they're selecting, let's say, the country for international destinations, they use the mouse for that. This is the regular user doing the transaction. But now when we look at this specific transaction, the $2 million transfer, everything is off. Let's first look at the mouse motion here. You can see it's very strange, almost like the data is distorted somehow. This is because it's done using remote access. The other thing is the behavior itself is different. For example, selecting the country is now done using the keyboard rather than using the mouse. So as you can see, this is quite different in terms of the behavior. Now, behind the scenes, what's going on is there is some malware. Specifically, that was Dridex. As the user was going to the bank, they were automatically directed to a fake website. At that fake website, which is a little bit like the Red-Headed League, they were given some sort of task, almost like copying the Encyclopedia Britannica. So now they're like spending time in that fake website. The fraudster now has their login credentials, they're logging in. using remote access from their computer onto the bank. When they actually do the transaction, they need to do like a challenge response, no problem. They go to that fake website and present that challenge in real time. The user solves the challenge for them and continues. So essentially here, social engineering is being used to distract the user and give the user something to do as the fraudster is actually doing the transaction from their computer. So this is essentially what we see here. And the last piece before we move on to the more nefarious types of social engineering is this one. I call it the curious case of the straw company. This is an e-commerce company, pretty innocent. They sell premium quality paper straws. You can buy a crate if you're like a big restaurant. But this is a very, very big order. 62 crates, many straws, costing $15,000 plus $10,000 for urgent shipping to Tuvalu. What is Tuvalu? Welcome to Tuvalu. It's an island in the Pacific Ocean, 11,000 people. They actually don't need that many straws. From the data itself, it's quite suspicious, but I can tell you that even without knowing any of that data, you could look at some of the behavior that the user is demonstrating and see something is off. So essentially, if I kind of run the session for you, you're going to see the user pasting some of the information. Credit cards, some people paste, but the incriminating piece here is pasting the zip code. And I can tell you, it actually shows very low familiarity with the data. In the US, people just know the 5-digit zip code. You don't paste it, you just type it. It's far easier. So as you can see, combination of what we know about the transaction, but also what we know about the behavior. And that was a part of an attack. Why was it social engineering? The actual attack was very interesting. So let's actually understand that point. After the transaction went through, it was $25,000 altogether. It was authorized by the credit card company. At that point, the criminal called the merchant and said, hey, I made a terrible mistake. I didn't realize it's so expensive to ship to Tuvalu. $10,000. This is crazy. I found another company. They can do it for $2,000. Can you do me a favor, because I already paid you all of that money, $10,000 for the shipping. Can you pass the $10,000 to their account and they'll handle this transaction, and then they'll handle any other shipping that we'll be using with you guys? And the merchant said, yeah, already got the money. So, okay, I'm going to send $10,000 to that shipping company. Of course, non-existent shipping company. It was just an account that the criminal opened up in the US. So that was a very clever social engineering story. At the end of the day, the fraudster had a credit card, and they got $10,000 using this clever social engineering story. But now we're going to talk about deep social engineering. So let's actually talk about a very specific call that happened a few years ago in the UK. Someone got a phone call from their mobile provider. Hey, you're late on your fees. Can you please pay? And she makes a payment with their debit card. Then 5 minutes later, the bank is calling. We see a suspicious transaction. Can you explain? And she says, yeah, it's my mobile carrier. No, it's not. You paid someone, but it's certainly not your mobile provider. Unfortunately, that was fraud. But don't worry, we'll have to switch you to a new bank account, because it's, you use your debit card, it's connected to a bank account, to be on the safe side. Please log in. We'll give you a new bank account number and move all of your money to this new bank account number. People that are listening probably grin and say, hey, obviously she did not fall for that, but she did. So you can see the login, and then you can see everything that happened after that. This is the real person doing this. It's not someone else. So that's a very, very interesting sort of question. This sort of problem, right? Is it that big? Is it that problematic, let's say? If we follow the online banking fraud losses in the UK, it started in 2004, 2006. You see this surge in fraud. That was phishing back in the phishing days. But then in 2007, the entire industry cracked the case by using strong authentication, Now, every transaction, every login is now strongly authenticating, using OTPs, using smart cards and stuff like that. The entire UK market is now strongly authenticated. And then 2008, something happened. The UK market moved to faster payments. So now money moves instantly to the other bank. You can see the impact on fraud. It basically tripled, despite the fact that all of these transactions were strongly authenticated. Now, 2011, 2013, there is this anti-malware capability that the banks deployed that kind of helped the situation. But you can see that after a few years, the fraudsters have new toolkits, essentially remote access attacks and some deep regular social engineering that are mixed with that. And you can see that fraud is beginning to surge again. 2016, the bank started to deploy behavioral biometrics. Mainly, basically all of the large banks in the UK are using this these days to look at the way the user is behaving in the transaction itself. And you can see the impact on overall fraud losses. But I'm cheating a little bit because I'm not counting one thing that started to happen a few years ago. Authorized push payments. If I actually count that as well, you can see that fraud is still on the increase. Authorized push payments is this exact story where the victim itself is being tricked to move money from their account using a very, very clever story. Is this even fraud? No, it's a scam. It's almost like walking in the street and someone will convince you to hand off some money. Should banks refund the users? Actually, the banks got a lot of complaints from consumer groups, and the regulators at some point said you have to make the user whole. You actually have to find this specific problem. It became a social issue, preying on the elderly, the vulnerable, and the banks are now expected to handle the situation. And if there is any kind of fraud loss for the user, even if it's a fully authorized transaction, now the user has to do that. Now the bank has to make the user whole and refund those lost transactions. Now, it started in the UK, it then spread into the Netherlands, and in 2020, it was seen in many other parts of the world, some of the early signs in North America as well.
So how do we detect this type of fraud? I mean, we're seeing strong authentication coming from a trusted device, no use of malware, no nefarious use of remote access tool, no bots. We're looking at the genuine user interacting in the online session. There's no criminal in sight. So maybe we see a longer than normal session. Maybe we see payments to new beneficiaries, but that's not a whole lot to go on. So the false positive rate must be disastrous based on this data.
So you need to look for the subtle marks, Watson. Consider this. If you actually deeply look at those sessions, here's what you see. Remember that the person was told, hey, we need to give you a new bank account number. What happens is that she was actually told to wait until the money is in that new bank account, like wait for confirmation. These are typically very long calls. During that time, this is what she was doing. If you actually look at the mouse motion on the screen, she was doodling on the screen like randomly, aimlessly wandering on the screen for 5 minutes. I can literally show it for 5 minutes. Why is she doing that? She was told to wait. She has nothing else to do. She doesn't want to go out of the computer because it's a very stressful situation. Maybe the session will close or something. So essentially, she keeps herself busy by doing these random motions of the mouse. But hey, this is online banking, right? It's not an entertainment system. Why is the user doing this? This is because the user is heavily distracted. They're not actually focused on online banking anymore. They're focused on the story around the whole scene. So a much higher percentage of the session is spent just wandering aimlessly, showing lack of focus. The other small subtle sign is hesitation. So when you actually click to submit, right, your finger goes to the submit button, using the left click of the mouse, and then you release the finger. It typically takes you around 120 milliseconds to do that. But if you are under duress, if something is like, telling you what to do, or you're under duress, typically you will be much more hesitant. Sometimes, like Jabez in the Red-Headed League story, you might even suspect that something is off. am I really releasing this big payment? Am I pretty sure that it's okay? So there is a greater degree of subconscious hesitation, and this is what the banks see when they look at those transactions. So cognitive actions take longer to complete. The other thing is being guided. This is a regular mobile device during mobile banking sessions. So people typically hold the device pretty steadily. As they tap on the device shifts a little bit. This is the accelerometer data. You can see small shifts as the destination account, for example, is being typed. But now let's imagine a deep social engineering scenario. Someone is on the phone telling you what to do, telling you what the new bank account is, for example. So you're basically listening to instructions, right? So the device will be close to your ear, and then you move the device like this so you can type. You listen, you then move the device, you type. The device moves all the time. This is very irregular. It basically shows that you're being guided. Someone is telling you where to send the money to. The thing is that none of these are on their own very, let's say, powerful indicators. So how do we actually go about solving the crime? We have to integrate all of those weak signals in a way that matters.
All right, well, let me take a crack at this one. So in this case, we're seeing a session from a user. We have two different scores. We have an ATO risk score, which is 368, considered low, and a voice scam risk score, 940, which is considered high. Which score should I use? Well, let's take a look at what's happening within the session. So in this case, what we're looking at in the middle of the screen is the session activity, the typing activity. The user is typing in the sort code and the account number for a payment. What's interesting are the pauses between each typing interaction. So this indicates the user is waiting for dictation. So they're only typing a couple of digits, maybe up to 4 digits at a time in the account number, with long pauses in between. The long pause at the end of typing the account number indicates perhaps the user's reciting the account number back to someone else. This information stands out. The graph we're looking at on the right, the red dot represents this particular session and the typing speed. So we see the typing speed is significantly slower than the blue shape on the left, which represents the general population. So the user is actually typing the sort code and the account number much slower than both this user typically would and the genuine population. So the slower than normal typing speed, the pauses in between typing the data within the session, it's not a lot to go on. So what do we see next is an hour later, a second session. This is the same user. Again, we're seeing that low ATO risk score and high voice scam score. So in this particular session, we can see in this transcript, the user scrolling up and down with the mouse wheel, which is pretty interesting. So the graphs on the right, we're seeing the red dot again represents this specific session compared to the general population. There's a much higher rate of backward and forward scrolling from this particular session. So there's not really a need for the user to scroll at this rate within the session. So that's pretty far off the norm. It seems to align with what Sherlock's talking about as, methods of distraction that are occurring within the session, all at the point of payment. Again, going back to the mouse click that Sherlock was talking about, we're looking at the graphs below are the mouse clicks for this user during the payment process. So the graph on the lower left is the min key press compared with the general population. So they're pressing the keys much more slowly than what we typically see from users. And the one on the right is submitting. So there is a pause before they submit this payment. So that's hesitation. So if we look at these particular behaviors at key points within the payment process where the user is hesitating and distracting while they're entering their payment detail, I think this is bad.
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct, Dr. Watson, and these are exactly the sort of small clues that we have to look at. If I compare, our methods with any other detective, teams, out there. Many of the detective teams are looking for like the small thing that doesn't fit. The way we do this, Dr. Watson and myself, we're basically looking at many, many small facts and like add them together and say the whole thing doesn't make sense. So it's the smallest of things. Let's call them micro behaviors. Very, very interesting micro behaviors. You have to collect hundreds of those micro behaviors and risk factors. Each of them will be a weak predictor. So the fact that you see, for example, guidance doesn't mean it's bad. The fact that you see hesitation doesn't mean it's bad. If you combine a lot of these into a model using machine learning classifiers, now you have something. Now you have this powerful predictor, almost trying to replicate what's going on Sherlock's head. And essentially, that's the way the banks in the UK are fighting deep social engineering these days. So quite interesting and quite a journey from the early days of just using transaction monitoring or looking at devices. You actually look at human behavior. And because we talk about social engineering and certainly deep social engineering, that's essentially the thing that would help in those nefarious crimes.
So in summary, we've discussed two types of social engineering. So we have the old tried and true method, some of the current trends that we're seeing at a high rate, where users are doing data harvesting, convincing genuine users to install remote access tools, someone calling to pretend to be the bank to access OTP codes, use of a Trojan attack or malware to distract the user, collect OTPs. And now we have deep social engineering, a whole new type of crime. So this is where we're seeing users being guided into the victim, themselves guided into sending money directly to the criminal. We see a trusted device. We see no malware, no nefarious use of remote access tool, no criminal activity. We're really looking at the genuine user interacting in the session. So it's a fully authorized transaction. It's not really fraud, but regulators are demanding action. So let's apply what we've learned today. Next week, we recommend identifying the controls you have versus regular deep social engineering, perform a gap analysis, and define the desired end game. In the first 3 months following this presentation, we recommend creating an action plan for addressing those gaps, talking to your peers about the best mix of technology and processes, educate senior stakeholders about the reputational risk of authorized push payment fraud. And within 6 months, we recommend securing a 2022 budget for handling deep social engineering and launch a program to evaluate battle-tested technologies that can help fill the gaps.
So that's it. We do hope that you enjoyed our presentation. We will be pleased if you contact us on LinkedIn. And thank you for your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of RSA conference.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.